I want to thank you all for the wonderful reception I've received. I've talked to so many wonderful people, and I've decided that I'm going to come here and teach. So you need to figure out who in the math department has to go away, because I want to start on Monday. Just kidding. Boy, I saw a couple of really mean faces. Okay, as we begin this second session, I want to take just a few minutes to talk a little bit about the academic advising changes that you guys are experiencing. I don't know them intimately, but when talking to the planning committee, they gave me some feedback. And so I thought it might be beneficial for us to talk a little bit about what IU Northwest is doing that is similar to what you guys might be doing, and maybe give you some information that might help broaden your perspective as you go into this. First thing I want to tell you, and we all know this intuitively, but it's really critical that we really get a hold of this. Academic advising is really, really important. Effective academic advising. I know you're probably thinking, well, duh. George Koo says it's hard to imagine any academic support function that is more important to student success and institutional productivity than advising. And Vincent Tinto says good advising is one of the key conditions that promotes retention. If we want to keep our students, we need to be effectively advising them. So I know that you are using the Spartan Success program powered by Starfish, and some changes are going to be happening with that. And again, I'm not intimately aware of what those are. I just know a little bit from what I've been told. But I thought it might be beneficial for me to share what we're doing at IU Northwest with something similar called the FLAGS program. And as you can see, FLAGS stands for Fostering Learning, Achievement, and Graduation Success. And we're the Red Hawks. Anyway, so basically when we get a class at the beginning of a semester, we get a what's called a student engagement roster. Sometimes I'll call that an SER, student engagement roster, with all of our students' information on it. And then we will be able to go in and provide feedback as faculty members. Now, this is an example of one of my classes that's starting next week. We start next week just as you do. Obviously, the names and student IDs have been removed for FERPA considerations. So just imagine that these fields here have names of students. We can actually go in, and this is probably similar to what you guys have, but we can go in and select students in bulk. We can select an entire class if we just want to leave general feedback. If all of your students are attending and you just want to give a report on attendance and everybody's there, you can do this very quickly. But of course, the real power behind this kind of collaborative advising is when we get to individual students. And so if we want to submit single student feedback, again, there would be a name at the top of this page. This is what the template looks like for us to go in and provide student feedback at IU Northwest. And each individual instructor, if they choose, they can create their own presets for their class if there's something unique that they want to be able to put into the student engagement roster in order to, that is unique to their course. They can certainly do that. And then, of course, we have the categories of observation, recommendation, and notes. And I'm going to talk just a little bit about those three categories and how we use those. Now, the important thing that we probably all agree on is that these reports are faculty driven. If the faculty aren't doing them, then the other academic success advisors, students are not going to know what's going on. So it is critical that the faculty be on board with this. Very important. So if we want to do observations, we have a lengthy pull-down menu. I've broken it into 3 sections here. And you can see that we can provide feedback on attendance, participation. I've never had to use areas of concern. I don't teach clinicals, and I've never had students fighting in my classroom, at least not since I stopped teaching in Gary. But that did happen. But anyway, we can provide feedback on assignments and quizzes and exams. I don't do much with the writing skills because I don't usually teach classes that require a writing component, but I do quite a bit with the quantitative skills and so forth. And then overall engagement. And again, remember, we can create comments unique to our class for in the presets as well. So as a faculty member, we need to go in and engage with this roster, which is why it's called the student engagement roster, and fill out information and then submit it. Second part, obviously, is if we're telling them observations we've made, we should then talk about some recommendations. Now, here's where I really, really want to encourage you as faculty members. This is critical. I know as a parent, I am often quick to tell my kids when they're doing something wrong, but I sometimes fall down when it comes to telling them that they're doing something good. It's really important that we go into this recommendation section and tell students when they're doing well, not just when they're doing poorly. Because if we just do it when they're doing poorly, then anytime they get an email alert that there's a new report in the student engagement roster, they're going to freak out or they're going to ignore it. So anyway, some of the recommendations, there are general recommendations here, but encouragement. Even just something as small as, hey, keep up the good work. We forget sometimes how important it is to us when someone that we respect or someone that we have to tolerate because they're our professor tells us we're doing a good job. Sometimes we forget about that. Remember back to when you were in college and you got an attaboy from one of your professors. It meant the world to you. You were on cloud 9. Something as simple as just keep up the good work. Even if you did that, you know, for your entire class in a blanket field, they're not going to know unless they talk to one another, but it's going to mean a lot to them. So I encourage you to use the encouragement tab. We're quick to jump over here to the assistance needed category and do that as well. In fact, sometimes we can put in something encouraging, but also say, hey, you know what? You might need to see the math lab, or you might need to go to the writing center, and so forth. So we've got our observations, we've got our recommendations, and then of course we have notes. And this is where we can kind of freestyle and write what we need to write. Now I recognize, faculty, that this can feel very tedious if you have a large class and you've got to go in and you feel like you have to put notes in for everybody. In times like that, we need to remember why we're here. The number one reason we're here is because we want to help our students to succeed. And sometimes that will help you over the hump. And if it doesn't, close it out and come back later when you're in a better frame of mind, and you'll be able to come up with some notes that will be encouraging to your students. Now, I want to talk about the roles of the 4 main groups that are affected at IU Northwest by flags. Obviously, the role of the faculty. It's our job to track student attendance and evaluate performance and so forth. I hate when people read off, so I won't read it. You all can read it. But it's our job to be involved with the student engagement roster. We have to go in and we have to fill it out, okay? When I show you the scale that I fill it out at, you might be a little surprised. Maybe you won't fill it out to quite that degree, but it's incumbent on us to do that. Now at IUN, when we put in, as faculty, we put in the feedback, an email goes to their academic advisor or their student success advisor or whatever that name is. Student success advisor? Okay, yeah. So an email would go to the student success advisor saying, hey, the faculty member for so-and-so put this out there. And then it's on them to go in there, read the report, and if there are recommendations from the faculty member, it's the academic advisor, in this case, it's their job to communicate that with the student, as well as possibly communicate it with student support services. I don't know what that looks like here at Manchester, but for us, our student support services works with students who have learning disabilities, physical disabilities, things like that. Sometimes I've had students in my classroom who they have a learning disability and they can't take notes because they can't keep up, and so they'll assign a note taker for them, things like that. So, but an email at IUN, an email does not go to student support services. It's up to the academic advisor to basically act on the recommendation of the faculty member. And then, of course, the 4th and most critical involved party is the student. When a student gets an email message from their professor, our mind automatically defaults, if we're the student, to, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Okay? We need to kind of fix that in our students' minds. Our students shouldn't fear us as the boogeyman, and we need to find a way to help them overcome that. But anyway, they're going to get a recommendation email as well, and they should open it up. Do you at Manchester have trouble getting your students to open their Manchester emails? They'll open their other emails, but they won't. Okay, all right, we're all in the same family then. Drives me crazy. I'll talk to a student a week or so after I make a student engagement roster notation and say, hey, I told you, I sent you an email that you should come and talk to me. And they're like, I never got that email. I said, well, did you look at your Manchester or your IUN email? No. Well, you need to open that up. So one of the things I do during my first week of classes is I make sure that my students understand that I will only communicate with them through their IUN emails. And if they send me an email from a non-IUN address, I won't answer it. It's harsh, But we've got to get our students to communicate with us in a consistent manner. And the reality is you can attach all sorts of stuff to emails. IUN has a very, very rigorous system for filtering out any viruses that could come through email and so forth. So that's why I only do that. Anyway, so in my experience with the student engagement roster, I've discovered a few what I call keys to this collaborative advising. And the first one is enthusiastic and consistent participation from all parties, especially faculty. Now, I woke up this morning at about 5:30 and thought about changing the word enthusiastic here. Because nobody in here is going, oh boy, I can't wait to go online and spend an hour filling out this engagement roster on all my students. But consistent is the important part. We need to do this consistently. We need to do it for all of our students, not just the ones who are struggling. Even if it's a student who's getting an A and perfect scores, just keep up the good work. All you have to do, and then they know that you are watching them, okay? Enthusiastic from the standpoint of our focus is on student success. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. Clear and direct communication. Don't be vague. I'm hoping that the Spartan Success program has an option where they can put in, you can put in your own notes, your own comments and stuff like we have it at the Flags program. So use that as an opportunity. Don't be vague. You know, don't say to a student, you need to do better in class. Say to a student, you need to get a 75 on the next test in order to bring your grade up to passing. Something that you could say. Or you need to come see me immediately because I am concerned about whether you're going to pass the class. Don't be vague, okay? Now, this is critical, and I think that you're probably going to be talking a lot about this, fostering a team concept. And as I've been thinking about this, I had an analogy pop into my head last night. I was watching my beloved Chicago Cubs choke away a game last night. I went to bed after they had blown a huge lead, and I woke up in the middle of the night and checked my phone, and they had somehow managed to come back and win. So I was ecstatic. But when I woke up, I started thinking about this idea of a team concept, and I was reminded of Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps is the greatest swimmer in Olympic history. And when we hear Michael Phelps' name, we can immediately see him on the medal stand. We can immediately imagine him diving into the pool. We think about him and his singularly great achievement. The thing we don't think about is the team of coaches that he has that are helping him achieve that success. He has somebody that teaches him, or that coaches him on nutrition. He has somebody who coaches him on fitness. He has a stroke instructor who helps him with the different strokes he has to make. He has a coach who helps him make sure that his dive into the water is the most effective and the cleanest dive it can possibly be to minimize friction and give him that little extra tenth of a second that he needs in order to win the gold medal. And yet all we think about is Michael Phelps on the medal stand. As you go into this training for Spartan Success and you develop this team concept, I want you to think of each of your students that you're advising as a Michael Phelps. And you guys are the coaches who are bringing out the best in that student. Your entire purpose is to help that student to achieve the best success they possibly can. And when we keep that focus, then it doesn't matter if, well, there's a student success advisor who's also in the mix, or student support services over here is also in the mix. It doesn't matter, because ultimately we are helping our students achieve the greatest success. So keep that in mind. Everything we do should be focused on the success of our students. It's hard to do when we're really, really frustrated. I'm going to talk about a really, really frustrating college student in a little bit, and you'll see what I mean when we get to that. Frequent updates are vital for increased probability of student success. Now, I was talking with, I don't remember whether it was Michelle or Mary or who I was talking to, but we were talking about the number of times that you would engage in the student roster. And I think it was mentioned maybe a couple times early in the semester, something like that. So what I'm about to put up here is my own engagement with the student engagement roster. It might look a little overwhelming, and I'm not telling you that you have to do it this often, but this is what I do. I go into the student engagement roster and I make a report on every one of my students at the end of week 1, 2, 4, 8, or if the automatic withdrawal deadline shifts, I'll do it, you know, week 7 if I need to, and then week 11. And here's my rationale for that. Oops. Oh, I gave it away. Oh man, I hit the wrong button. Okay, here's my rationale. At the end of week 1, I've told them, look, you're going to be getting emails from me regularly about your progress in the class. I want you to know what that's like. So you're going to get one at the end of the week. And this is the easy one to do because in general, most if not all of your students have attended all of your classes that week. And it's really easy to just go in and in bulk say attending regularly. And it's very quick. By the end of the 2nd week, you'll notice if you've got some students who are not attending on a regular basis, or if they've missed a couple classes, and you might need to go in and give them some feedback. When we get to week 4, that's when we've had a test or a couple of quizzes. Their attendance is starting to be reflective of what they're probably going to do, and so I'll make an engagement right there. When I get to week 8 or week 7, depending on when the automatic withdrawal deadline is, this is when I've gone in and I've looked at every student's grade, determined, what they can achieve the rest of the way. It's usually after the midterm, obviously, what they can achieve the rest of the way. And if they are not in a position where they can still pass my class, I tell them. I tell them, come talk to me, we need to talk, you are not going to be able to pass your class, this class. And of course in a math class, if they can't calculate that themselves, we talked about that earlier. And then week 11, I do that because we're past the automatic withdrawal deadline. Any students who are going to drop will have already dropped. And week 11 is when you kind of hit the wall. It's like, okay, we're past the middle of the semester, I'm getting tired. We as instructors and advisors are getting tired too, about 3/4 of the way into the semester. It's like, oh my gosh, when is the semester ever going to be over? And so I re-engage with them around week 11 just to remind them of where they are. And I'll usually include a comment like, okay, we're getting to the end. Whenever you're in a race and you're getting close to the finish line, you want to sprint. And you need to sprint. Let's push through. So again, I know this might be a little more rigorous than what you're doing here, and that's okay. This is just me. At IU Northwest, we're actually only required to do it at like week 2, I think week 5, although I do it at week 4, and then like week 8 or 9. So we're only required to do it 3 times a semester. But anyway, so that's just a very brief and somewhat dry look at the academic advising at IU Northwest. Now, I kind of stole my thunder already, but I want to tell you that bad advising is not an option, okay? You all know who this guy is, most of you, Matt Foley. Where does Matt Foley live? In a van down by the river. And if we are not doing effective academic advising, the last thing we want is for our students to end up living in a van down by the river. So we need to do whatever it is that we can help our students to succeed. Now, I'm going to transition into this last part of my talk, and I want to talk about, and I want to remind you of where you are in your educational journey and where you've come from. And I couldn't think of a better way to draw a parallel from our journey as teachers than to look at a classic book, The Hobbit. In J.R.R. Tolkien's literary classic, The Hobbit, our hero, Bilbo Baggins, lives a quiet, peaceful life in his comfortable hole at Bag End, near the bustling village of Hobbiton. One day, Bilbo's comfortable life is shattered by the arrival of the old wizard Gandalf, who persuades Bilbo to set out on an adventure with 13 militant dwarfs in a great quest to reclaim their treasure from the tale's villain, a fire-breathing dragon named Smaug. And the dwarves are skeptical about Gandalf's selection of Bilbo for their quest. Bilbo is terrified to leave his comfortable village. But Gandalf assures both Bilbo and the dwarves that there is more to this little hobbit than meets the eye. Every one of us has a tale to tell. You might think that there isn't anything interesting or unique about your story or what can be learned from it. I used to feel that way too, but not anymore. Because who we are as teachers was formed by the journey we took and the path that we traveled. The experiences you have, both good and bad, define who you are, not only as a teacher, but as a mentor and as a guide. Our students are the frightened and uncertain hobbit learners, and you are Gandalf. And who is this Gandalf? Who are you? What is your quest? I'll tell you what your quest is. Your quest is to do the best you can to help your students to achieve big success. So I have 3 simple objectives as I close out my thoughts this morning. The first thing I want to do is I want to share the story of the Gandalfs in my life, the individuals who mentored me and helped me to become a successful, passionate teacher who cares about student success. Second, I want you to be able to reflect on your own story. I want you to think about the Gandalfs in your own life. And then third, when you walk out of here this morning, I hope that you will be energized and encouraged. I want this to be a day where you positively reconnect with your colleagues. I've seen that happening already this morning. The energy is overwhelming and amazing. But I want you to be energized and reinvigorated when you walk back into the classroom on Monday morning. So, this is my story. And like any good story, it starts out once upon a time. It was the fall of 1981, and I had the world by the tail. I was finally at the top of the pecking order, a high school senior. I had a pretty girlfriend, I had my dad's car, and I had a level of popularity that was the envy of nerds everywhere. I also had absolutely no idea what I was going to be doing 1 year in the future. While my friends were taking the SAT and sending out college applications, I was just having fun. Now, as partiers go, I was relatively tame. I didn't drink or smoke or anything like that. I just kind of hung out. And in my nerd community, I was considered cool. For those of you who don't know or aren't part of a nerd community, there are cool nerds. I see a couple people nodding. They know exactly what I'm talking about. But underneath my nerdishly cool exterior, I was terrified. All of my friends knew what they were going to be doing when high school ended. Some were going into the military, some had been accepted to multiple colleges. Nearly all of them had taken and passed the SAT. I had not taken the SAT. And the reason was simple. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I only knew that I loved high school, and I hung on to it with a death grip. I was afraid to take a leap after anything else. Finally, I gave in to my anxiety, and I went to see my guidance counselor, Russ Keller. Mr. Keller was a legendary figure at Crown Point High School. He had captured my imagination when I was a freshman, and even though I had been transferred to a different guidance counselor my sophomore year, I refused to talk to anybody but him about my situation. Mr. Keller is one of the people in my life whose impact helped mold me into the teacher that I am today. So I told Mr. Keller that I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. After some discussion, he gave me a series of skills and aptitude tests. I'm sure you remember taking those. They were designed to help me determine my interests and my abilities. I got to miss half a day of school, which I thought was totally cool because I was not a very serious student. And when I finished taking those exams, Mr. Keller told me, okay, come back tomorrow and I'm going to give you your results. That was really cool because I got to miss my physics class the first hour of the day, and I hated my physics class. Anyway, so the next day I went back to Mr. Keller's office, and he had this stack of papers on his desk. And he was shuffling through them, and he had his glasses down on his nose like that, and he was looking at these pieces of paper. And then he'd look at me, and then he'd look back at the papers, and I couldn't quite tell what was on his face. I was really, really getting anxious. Finally, he looked at me and he said, John, according to all of your scores, your ideal career goal is to become a high school math or science teacher. I kid you not, that's what he said. So I sat back and kind of looked at him, my trusted guidance counselor. I was trying to decide whether he was pulling a prank on me or not because that's the kind of guy he was. But I finally realized he was not kidding, and I got agitated. And I said, what are you talking about? And he walked me through this pile of papers that showed that apparently I was empathetic and passionate, compassionate and understanding and patient. All the things I had used to woo the girls in high school but none of which I imagined would amount to anything in terms of a career. But he was insistent. He said that my gifts and my skills and my abilities pointed to becoming a teacher. I looked Mr. Keller straight in the eye and said the words that I would later learn to regret. And I said this to him. I said, Mr. Keller, when I walk out the doors of Crown Point High School, I am never walking into another high school again as long as I live. I left his office feeling completely deflated and absolutely determined that I was not going to become a high school teacher. Now, I did finally take the ACT. I stand before you as someone who has never taken the SAT. I did take the ACT because I wanted to keep my options open. I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And then one day, a family friend named Betty came up to me and she said, so, are you going to college? And I said, well, I'm not sure. At the time, I had no money. I thought I might work for a couple years and save up some money to go to college, but I was just trying to push everything off. So when Betty asked me if I was going to college, I said, well, I don't know. Maybe, I said, you know, maybe I'll go into medicine. I hear doctors make a lot of money. I said that to my friend Betty. On May 28th, 1982, I graduated from high school. And it was a festive night. Lots of graduation parties and things like that going on. But my girlfriend and I decided that we would just go out for a quiet dinner with the four of us. Well, while we were getting ready to leave, we ran into Betty at the graduation ceremony. And she asked if she could join us for dinner. And we were delighted. Betty had just lost her husband a couple months earlier, and she was often quite lonely. So we said, yes, join us for dinner. We'd love that. So the five of us went out to dinner. And after dinner, Betty said to my parents, she goes, can I give John a graduation present? And they're like, sure, no problem. So she hands me a card. And I opened the graduation card, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. And of course, there was a check inside. And I tried to ignore it because I wanted to be polite, but I couldn't. My jaw almost hit the floor when I looked at the check. It was for $3,000. I couldn't speak. All I could do was just hold the check out to my mom and my girlfriend, and my mom burst into tears. And then Betty said something that I will never forget, and folks, you can't make this stuff up. She said, I wanted to help you with your dream of becoming a doctor. I was completely shocked. My dream of becoming a doctor, this was an offhand comment I had made to her 3 or 4 months earlier, just to answer a question and kind of put off what I didn't really want to answer. And then this wonderful, generous lady who had just lost her husband gives me $3,000 to go to college. By the way, that's equivalent to roughly $7,500 today. A lot of money. So I stammered something about not being sure that I was smart enough or good enough to become a doctor, and she said, you know what, that's okay. This is my gift to you. If you want to change your major, you feel free to do so. So the next couple of weeks were a whirlwind. I had to get enrolled in college. I hadn't applied anywhere, but I got enrolled at IU Northwest, and I began taking classes there. I walked into an academic advisor who was a very bad academic advisor. I walked in and said, I want to be a doctor. And they said, well, you need pre-med, take these courses. And that was the extent of my conversation with them, which is an example of why we need this really effective advising. So my first college class was at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. It was in a lecture hall similar to this with about 80 students in it. My first professor was Dr. Timothy Stabler. He handed us a syllabus that seemed thicker than some of my high school textbooks. He lectured nonstop for 75 minutes. Then he gave us about 4 dozen pages of reading and told us we were going to have a quiz on Wednesday. This was just my biology class. I also had classes in German, computer science, and psychology who all had similar, the professors had similar expectations. I was not ready for the culture shock that I experienced. I walked out of that classroom shocked and in a complete fog, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I had gotten myself into. Now, even though I was not committed to my whole becoming a doctor thing, that didn't prevent me from using some of the money that Betty had given me to buy my college class ring. I'm wearing it today. This is a reminder of the foolishness of youth. I bought that 2 weeks into the semester. I was already failing the biology class, and you can see the medical insignia on the ring. And again, I'm wearing it right now, so if anybody really wants to see it up close to see if I make it, you can't make this stuff up. Anyway, So my first few weeks of college were littered with absences. I shared that earlier. One day I couldn't find a parking spot. There was another day where I was stopped by a train. It was just on and on and on. And the more classes I missed, obviously, the further behind I fell. And the further behind I fell, the more depressed I got. So I just started hanging out at a video arcade, turning Betty's money into quarters that I would feed nonstop into the video game machines. The fact that I somehow managed to pass all of my classes the first semester is amazing to me. You can see my Intro to Biological Sciences class with the D, Psychology with the D, Computers C-, German C. That was my first college transcript. Oh, and by the way, that's my old address, so if you want to come visit, I don't know who lives there now, but anyway. My second semester was more of the same. I blew off classes regularly, but my GPA actually went up. Of course, the reason my GPA went up is because I withdrew from 2 classes. Remember I told you that I took another biology class, Intro to Plant Kingdom. Yeah, I took a botany class to be a doctor. Anyway, I was really not being advised well. I know, it's comical, isn't it? If it weren't my transcript, well, I wouldn't be laughing so hard. I'm a little offended. No, I'm kidding. Anyway, so my GPA actually went up, but it was still below 2.0, so I got a letter from the university that said, hey, you're on academic probation. That fall, I renewed my commitment to college for about 2 weeks. Then I fell back into the same patterns that had tripped me up during the previous year. I kept skipping classes, I hung out with my non-college friends at the bowling alley and the video arcade, and I slowly frittered away the last of the money that Betty had given me. It was no surprise when I received a letter from the university inviting me to stop attending. I shared that letter earlier. So I spent the next 18 months delivering pizzas. At the same time, my relationship with my high school girlfriend was getting deeper and more intense, and we started talking about marriage. I shared some of that earlier. I knew that she wanted me to do something with my life, and I was kind of lost, so I started exploring options. One option was a correspondence course in becoming a private eye. Yep. I actually got certified to be I got a driver's license to be a truck driver. I've never driven a big rig in my life, but my driver's license would have allowed me to at the age of 19. I almost enlisted in the Air Force. That was a big mistake. And finally, I hit rock bottom. I thought about becoming a janitor on a cruise ship. I investigated that as a possibility. Now, as I told you earlier, my girlfriend was getting fed up, and she told me to get my act together, pull up my big boy pants, and move on. And I realized reluctantly at that point that it was time for me to go back to IU Northwest and major in math education. Mr. Keller had been right all along, and I admitted that. So 3 years after that fateful conversation where I told him I was never going to walk back into another high school again, I walked back into IUN to become a high school math teacher. It wasn't easy. As you might recall, my GPA was only 1.4. To get into the education program, as I told you, I needed a 2.5. I retook those 2 courses and brought my GPA up to a 2.33. You can see the A and the B plus there. Actually, there and there. I also took a public speaking class and got an A in it, so I want the public speaking professors to know that I got an A in public speaking. Anyway, sorry. But then something happened. Now, what was the GPA I needed in order to get into the education program? 2.5, and my GPA was a 2.33 at that time. And then a moment changed my life radically was when this man, Dr. Jim Boland, education professor in charge of the admissions process, took a look at my transcript. He took a look at the gap of a year and a half when I was out of college because I'd been kicked out. And he saw what I had done to improve my GPA, and he decided to give me a chance. And he waived the requirement. He waived the 2.5 requirement and let me into the education program with a 2.3. Dr. Boland is one of the Gandalfs in my life. He believed in me, and he changed the course of my life. My life would be completely different today if he had not waived that requirement, and the reason is because they only admitted students 1 time per year. I would have had to wait another entire academic year to get into the program. Who knows what would have happened during that year? I hope I would have brought my grades up. But the position that I got in Gary would not have been available when I finally graduated. The position at IU Northwest certainly would not have been available. Dr. Boland changed my life because of his kindness and compassion and the fact that he believed that I could get it together. So I completed my degree, and I was hired to teach at Emerson School for the Visual and Performing Arts in Gary, Indiana. That was one of the hardest jobs I've ever had, but it was the most rewarding. I was so naive when I walked into that school. I had no idea what I was doing. I had all these preconceived notions of what it meant to teach. And I walked in there. Emerson was a teaching laboratory for me. It was unbelievable. I learned the most valuable lesson in my teaching career at Emerson. Quite simply, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I had these students that I wanted to teach, but I learned very quickly. It's one of my groups of classes from the 90s, some good kids there. I had some students there that were not going to bother to learn from me until I could show them that I cared. They were living very rough, very hard lives. For many students, I was the first white teacher that ever had. I had one young woman named Katrina, and I could tell in 8th grade, she did not like me from day one. I could tell. And after a few weeks, I finally said to her, Katrina, why don't you like me? And in front of the entire class, she just blurted out, because you're white. And I was blown away. I mean, I was 3 weeks into being a new college, high school teacher, and just shocked at her disrespect, but also by her blatant honesty. And I took the opportunity to stop the math class and have a conversation with the entire course about her feelings. And we unpacked a lot of those issues. And I discovered other students in the class who were having similar feelings. And it was the most amazing experience I ever had in a math class where I wasn't actually teaching math. I learned so much about how to connect with my students and how to understand what they were feeling. I actually ran into Katrina a few years ago. She was working, of all places, in the cafeteria at IU Northwest. And I said, how's it going? How are things? And we laughed and caught up. We had developed a good relationship after that initial falling out. And I said, so are you staying out of trouble? And she laughed and she said, yeah, I know I was trouble in high school, but I've got it together now. I've got a couple kids. And I realized that Katrina was a part of my teaching path, my teaching experience. And even more importantly to me was that I was a part of her educational journey as well. I was kind of like a Gandalf in her life, someone that she was able to connect with and guide her through some rough patches. Unfortunately, not all of the stories from Emerson have a happy ending. I had a student named Kismont. He was 15 years old and he was in the 8th grade. And he had been held back 2 times, not because he was dumb, but because he was lazy. He just liked to have fun. He was a mischievous kid. He liked to laugh and joke, but he didn't like doing his work. And so he kept getting held back. I really liked Kismont. He was a fun kid. He would laugh and joke, and he really liked me. We got along really well. And I made it my passion, my goal, my mission, my quest to help Kismont get out of the 8th grade. That's what I wanted to do. Math was one of the classes holding him back, and I was going to do everything I could to help him get out of the 8th grade. At about that same time, there had been a report released about the high percentage of African-American males between the ages of 18 and 25 who were incarcerated or ended up dead because of violence. And I shared that report with Kismont, and I said, Kismont, I'm afraid that if you don't get your act together and do something, this could be you. And he laughed like he always did. He goes, oh, Mr. Becker, I got this. Everything's fine. That's not going to be me. I could not convince him that he needed to change the direction of his future. A few weeks after that same conversation, I walked into the main office, and my assistant principal came up to me, and she said, did you hear about Kismont? And I rolled my eyes and said, what did he do now? And she told me sadly that Kismont had been hanging out with a group of shady friends, and a drug deal had gone bad, and he had been shot and killed. And he was dead before his 16th birthday. I was devastated. Kismont wasn't the first of my students to have been killed by gang violence, but his death hit me the hardest. And the day that I found out that Kismont had died, something died inside of me as well. I was tired of trying to be not just a teacher, but a mentor and even a surrogate parent to these students. I was crushed by the pain of loss, and I was devastated that another kid who had potential would never live to see that opportunity again. Excuse me. It's the first time I've shared that story publicly. It's a little emotional. After Kismont died, I devolved into what I despised. I became an apathetic classroom monitor, like this guy from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'm sure you remember this guy. Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Everybody in this classroom can probably think back to one time in their life when they had a teacher like this. I know I can. For me, it was my physics teacher, which was why I was so glad I could miss physics that day. We've all had a teacher who would drone on endlessly, hand out some worksheets, and then sit at their desk. I became that person for 2 years, 2 endlessly long years. I never intended to become one of those teachers, but after Kismet died, I just retreated into a shell. I would stand in front of my classroom and I would lecture for 20 or 30 minutes. I would hand out worksheets based on my lecture, and then I would sit at my desk and read the newspaper. I really, really despised teachers like that, and I had become that which I despised. But at that time, at the same time when I was going through that, an adjunct position had opened up at IU Northwest. Now, I didn't really want to do any more teaching. I was feeling pretty bummed out about it during the day, but we had 2 kids at the time with a third on the way, and we needed the money. So I took the position at IU Northwest, and something interesting happened. I rediscovered the joy of teaching. I found a new purpose when I started teaching college students, and I discovered something about myself. I learned that when I didn't have to worry about the physical or emotional needs of my students and I could simply teach the content, I enjoyed it again. And I started coming out of that math coma, that teacher coma that I had been in for so long. Then in the spring of 1996, IUN began looking for a director of developmental mathematics. I desperately wanted that position. I was in the depths of despair during the day and on cloud 9 at night in my teaching career. It was a long shot because there were more than 75 applicants, but I firmly believe it was by the grace of God alone that I made it to that final group of 5, and I was eventually hired in April to start in August. So I had 2 more months of teaching before the summer at Emerson. Those last 2 months seemed to last forever. I just could not wait to get out of Emerson. I loved my kids, but I was not a good teacher at Emerson. And when I finally got to August and got into my teaching career at IUN, I knew that teaching at a university would mean all my troubles were gone, right? Absolutely. Now that we're teaching in the university, all our teaching troubles are gone. My first few years at IU Northwest were fantastic. I revised the curriculum for the developmental math program. I had supervisory responsibility over about a dozen adjunct faculty members, and I immersed myself in university life. I absolutely loved it. The irony was not lost on me at the time that I was teaching at the same university that had kicked me out 13 years earlier. So about 5 years into my career at IU Northwest, I was nominated by one of my students for the Campus Founders Day Teaching Award, the award they give to the outstanding teacher on the IU Northwest campus. I was honored to be nominated, but I figured there was no way that I would ever win such an award because that's reserved for the tenure track and the tenured faculty. So I wasn't going to apply. Then the Founders Day Teaching Committee chair heard through the grapevine that I wasn't going to apply, so she came to talk to me and she said, listen, if a student nominates you for something like this, you owe it to them to at least put your name in the hat. You need to apply out of respect to your students. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll do that. So I did. I submitted a file, and some professors came and observed my classroom, and 2 months later, I was shocked to be standing at the podium receiving the Founders Day Teaching Award from the Chancellor of the University. I've received a couple of additional teaching awards in the following years, but I started to get this sense of, this growing sense of uneasiness. And the reason was that the longer I taught at IUN, the more I started encountering students who were like I had been as a college freshman. And those students annoyed the heck out of me. I don't know how my professors ever could tolerate me and the stuff I put them through. I couldn't motivate them to get to class. I couldn't get them to study. I couldn't get them to come to my office and ask for help. Now I finally understood what Dr. Stabler had felt about me when I was his student many years earlier. And as I grew more frustrated with my students, I looked for opportunities to serve the university in different ways. The dean in the College of Arts and Sciences was looking for somebody to help with enrollment projections and budget concerns and things like that. And she asked me if I would be interested in being the interim assistant dean of Arts and Sciences. And I thought, yeah, that sounds great. And so I started working in the administration, the dark side, as some people refer to it. I started working as the assistant dean, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the dean was happy with my work as well. I carried one course teaching load. I only had to teach one class, and the rest of my time was spent doing administrative work. And the dean was so pleased with my work that she came to me a couple years later, and she said, would you be interested in the permanent position? Assistant Dean of Arts and Sciences. And I'm Like, yeah, that would be awesome. I would love to. Now, in the 2 years that I had been in that position as the interim, all of the faculty in arts and sciences had no problem with my work. I had the respect, I thought, and the cooperation of the entire faculty. But when they announced that a non-tenured, non-PhD instructor was going to be the assistant dean of arts and sciences, all of a sudden, the science faculty revolted. My own people. Arts and humanities loved me, but the science faculty said, no, he can't do that. And when the dean refused to relent, they went to the vice chancellor of academic affairs. Now, that vice chancellor was a new vice chancellor at the university, and he wanted to gain the respect of the faculty, so he went back to the dean and told her, you have to retract that offer. And I'll never forget the day that she did. It was August 15th of 2007. It was my birthday. It was the worst birthday present I have ever received. So I went back to the math department, returned to a full teaching schedule. The chair of the math department asked me if I wanted my position back as director of developmental math. And I was just so discouraged and disheartened and hurt, frankly hurt by some of my own colleagues in the math department that I declined. I went back to the math department, and even though I was struggling with teaching, I took back a full teaching load. Unfortunately, the students were as I had remembered. They were probably more talkative, less focused, and many of them still didn't come to class on a regular basis. And their overall grades reflected the combination of an apathetic student population coupled with a discouraged teacher. Interestingly enough, that vice chancellor who had made the dean take away the position left the university a year later because he was so frustrated with the faculty and he couldn't get them on board with what he wanted to do. Now that's key to the story because a new vice chancellor came in the following fall. And shortly after that new vice chancellor came in, his secretary contacted me and said, Dr. Malik wants to talk with you and with Dr. Hodges, the vice chancellor of student affairs. They would like to meet with you about something. And they wouldn't tell me what the something was. And I thought, okay, well, who else is going to be in the meeting? And the secretary said, just the three of you. So I was called into a meeting with the vice chancellors of academic affairs and student affairs, and I was terrified. I racked my brain. What could I have possibly done that this would draw the attention of the vice chancellor of both academic and student affairs? Because we know, maybe it's not this way at Manchester, but in many college settings that I've had experience in, we know that the academic and the student affairs sides don't always see eye to eye. But apparently they were seeing eye to eye on something that involved me, and I was scared. So I decided that I was going to pull a power move, and I showed up to the meeting 20 minutes early to claim my seat and be prepared, and they were already there. And, but when I walked in, they smiled. And so I figured I wasn't in any trouble. And I said, so what can I do for you? And they said, well, we are in the process of creating a new department. I talked about this earlier, the Office of Retention Initiatives. And the position will be focused on finding out why students are failing to persist and how we can get them to succeed. And they are going to oversee the Student Academic Appeals Program, the Reinstatement Program, Student Support Services, and all these other areas. Are you interested in the job? It was like that blunt. And I was like, yeah, I'd love that. That sounds awesome. I said, but wait a minute, why me? And Diane smiled and she said, well, the reason we're choosing you is because we created a list of faculty that we thought would do good in the job, and your name was on both of our lists. And so I began that position. I began the position of interim executive director of retention initiatives. Oh, I'm gonna jump right to the short part, okay? Long story short, I wanted the permanent position as director of Office of Retention Initiatives 2 years later, and they gave it to somebody else. I ended up having to go back to the classroom and teach again, and that was one of the worst days of my life because I had left teaching behind. I had gone over to administration and I loved it. So my dream of being the retention director faded. I eventually decided, look, I have to make a decision. Do I want to be in administration or teaching? People keep coming to me and offering me administrative opportunities, but I haven't gone after them. And when I weighed the pros and cons of going into administration, the only pro was the finances. The bureaucracy was just too much of a headache. So I decided that I was going to go full head-on back into teaching. And as I did that, I started thinking about the people in my life that had had an impact on my teaching career. That was my 4th grade teacher. She was the first teacher I ever had who made me feel like I could actually accomplish something. These two high school teachers, they over-assigned me work in high school. This is the one who made me read the K Mutiny because they saw something special in me that I could accomplish. Russ Keller, you've already met. Dr. Jim Boland, the education professor, you've already met. These were my principal and assistant principal at Emerson, two women who gave me a shot when I didn't think that, when I didn't know what I was doing as a teacher in the inner cities. Dr. Schiefelbusch was one of my IUN professors, and he was my #1 advocate for getting the position in the Office of Retention, or in the math department as the Director of Developmental Math. Chuck Gallmeyer, he's kind of a legend around Indiana University. He was the president of the faculty, and he gave me the position of chairman of the Founders Day Teaching Award. And Robin Hass-Berkey, she's the professor who told me that I better apply for the Founders Day Award because what our students say matters. This is my personal teaching Hall of Fame. These are the Gandalfs of my life. The Gandalfs that have molded me, who led me on a journey that took me all the way to standing here before you today. I handed out some note cards earlier. We don't have time to get to those, and that's okay. But what I would encourage you to do is over lunch or in the next day or so, take those note cards and jot down the names on each card of 3 professors, teachers, or academic advisors in your life that had an impact on your career. Think back on them. What are their names? Who are they? Those people matter in your life and your career. Just like my own personal Hall of Fame, my personal Gandalfs that took me from a college flunk out to the winner of the 2014 Indiana University President's Award for Distinguished Teaching. I'm going to cut through a lot of that. So just as an example, Russ Keller, on that note card, Russ Keller opened my mind to teaching by helping me to discover my skills, gifts, and abilities. I encourage you to take time to do that activity and identify the teachers in your life who changed your career. Because here's the reality. Someday, your students are going to be sitting in a classroom or in a room like this, talking about the impactful people in their lives. They're going to be talking about the people that mattered to them. And I want to encourage you today to do anything and everything that you possibly can to become a Gandalf that they will remember for the rest of their lives. I apologize for going a couple minutes over. That clock threw me off. I had the numbers backwards. So I thought I had 10 more minutes, but anyway, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Jon, for coming today. If you want to connect with Jon, he'll also be at lunch. Just a couple things as we move. We're going to be moving over to the Joe Young Switzer Center upstairs, and we'll be over there for the rest of the afternoon. Something that might be a little bit different is you have a table assignment. And so if you are faculty or a success advisor, you'll have a number. There'll be a chart as you come in, or find Amanda or me, and I can tell you what your table number is. And so you'll be seated with a success advisor who will be working with your college and department for our afternoon activities. So I'll ask that, as you're having lunch, the buffet style lunch today, please include them in the conversations. There should be some questions there to help you kind of reflect on this morning and also move forward into this afternoon. So please make sure you note those table numbers whenever you go in, and I will see you over there. Thank you.